I wonder if dogs can have selective hearing too. That's a good wonder question. Meredith says, I absolutely believe this to be true. Trust me, I was a dog owner for exactly 1 week. Okay, well, now we know. um, it's disheartening when they don't even acknowledge you're saying no. Like, are you really deaf? It's a good question. Um, Oliver, our dog, he just he talks back. Um, don't know what he's saying though. So maybe they think the same thing. Are we tone deaf? Because when they're barking, they're like, guys, come on, figure it out. I'm trying to talk to you. And Mark, then you say leash, and very true. Nice. Okay, look at that. Look at all the wondrous wondering that we have happening here. How exciting. I hope everybody's doing decently well this morning. Gosh, I it's hard to even hope. Well, it's not hard to hope for that. Maybe it is. It's hard to assess that because what a dizzying time. So much. I don't know about you. I mean, everybody. If you're anything like me, day by day, you just find yourself in a slightly different spot. But as we enter into October and just with fall in general, like I love the fall season, but this one feels high stakes, intense. And I've talked to a number of different friends this week about how it feels like there's just like this like visceral anxiety that kind of is running through the collective vein of culture right now. And it's scary. I mean, it seems like every single week there's something to mourn over. Some gross injustice that has happened in our country, the loss of somebody, whatever it might be. Last week we had the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is still fresh, and the just what that is turning into in terms of a national political conversation is scary and confusing. And then this past week, with just the ridiculous result of the trial of the officers in the Breonna Taylor killing, it's just really disheartening. There seems to be compounded one thing after another that can leave us in this space of like, man, where do we go from here? And again, all that leading to where we're headed with an election season, and then also just where America is at currently, of just not seeming to be able to talk to one another can be a lot. It can be really anxiety inducing. So I'm right there with you in that. I feel that with you, and I think it's a common feeling that we're all sharing. So don't feel like it's unnatural, and know that these feelings are valid. And it is a scary and confusing time, but day by day, step by step, sunrise by sunset by sunrise, we'll get there and we will be together. Meredith's saying, I've been wondering how I will make it through winter as a single person in the midst of a pandemic and this divisive and downright scary political climate. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many questions and uncertainties, and each one speaks to who we are uniquely as individuals, but also who we are as a culture. There's a balance of both of those things happening, and it can leave, at least for me, it leaves me in a spot of being like, God, I don't even know where to plant my feet. And Mark, another good point, is this a time blip or a trend? This fall seems to hold that answer. Yeah, I think all those are really true statements and really true concerns. And we last week we touched on we've been exploring, we are exploring these 3 weeks, three words that I think are dynamic and can help add understanding and framework for this time that we're in. And they're 3 words that Branches is really seeking to lean into as we're going forward, as we're trying to figure out who we are to become during this socially distant phase of life for all of us, but also just going forward in general. The 3 words that we're hoping can be a campfire for us to sort of surround ourselves around and provide centering. These all stem from a new vision statement that myself and the leadership team has worked together to create. And next Sunday evening, actually, we're going to have like a town hall style meeting. Look for more information on that and an email to come this week. But after Sunday service next week at 10 a.m., we will have had 3 words talked about. So we're going to have a follow-up Zoom meeting to that, and I think we're planning on doing that later in the day, maybe an early evening, for all of us to come together as a community, anybody who wants to have a Zoom conversation about what does all this mean, and we want to get your insight and your takes on what we've been discussing, just because we're all branches. We all have a contribution to make to this. So that's where we're headed. But the vision statement, which you may have heard last week, and we've been talking about it a little bit and sending it out in an email, is that we, branches, seek to embody the themes and the messages of Jesus, which affirm all people through the mystery of the universal Christ inherent within all things. So I dove into this a little bit more extensively last week, but just to repeat it again, we as branches seek to embody the themes and the messages of Jesus. So embodiment of themes and messages, manifestation as opposed to strictly exception, which is a distinction, and it's a fun distinction to explore, and that's something we're wanting to explore going forward. And those themes and messages are ones that affirm all people, and they affirm all people through a mystery of a universal Christ. Christ being a name for the holiness that is dwelling within all things. The mystery of the universal Christ that's inherent within all things. So that is what we as branches are looking to explore and dive into and also center ourselves around. And then there are 3 words that we think really help us do this and help provide a framework for how that vision statement comes to life in our day-to-day context. The first is story. And last week we talked about story and how there's a story in everything. And to be attentive to that is our holy work as a storytelling species. We as humans have this unique gift and ability to catch stories, to witness them, and to observe the world and to make meaning. And so our first word was story. What are the stories that are happening, and how can we give ourselves to the attention of those stories? And this language can seem playful, it can seem fun, and that's good. We want that because life should be playful. But just like the things that are causing us to wonder, there's a balance between the playful and then the really core conviction-based feeling indwelling within us, concern, passion, all those things. So story, although it's playful in one sense, it is incredibly important and imperative in another. There are stories in our society right now of injustices and racism and discrimination based on how people identify or based on the color of people's skins. Those are all stories that are being told right now. They're stories that certain people choose to believe in. And so stories can be this playful idea like the way a squirrel jumps off a fence onto the ground and what that means to you. But there are also these really important concepts of what are the stories that we're telling about reality as an individual, but also as a collective culture, as a tribe, as a group of people with a shared identity. And the more that we can latch on to and name those stories and have a clearer understanding of them, the more that we can begin to have conversation. But the whole idea is that these 3 words build on each other. So last week we talked about story, and this week we're talking about wonder. So the hope is that what story does, what witnessing story does, is it allows us to tap into a sense of wonder. And today, I'm going to touch and talk about what we perceive wonder to mean in light of this, in light of our vision statement, in light of what we talked about regarding story last week. And all those videos are available. You can go back and watch them. But yeah, so today we're gonna dive in and touch on wonder. But before we do that, I often forget to do this, but I think it's important. Let's take a second to pause, to breathe, to find a center within all of us. There may be some distractions around us. That's okay. Let the distractions happen. Kids are running around playing. That's great. They're probably existing in a space of wonder. I get it. It's not always easy to breathe and find a center, and that is okay, and there's a certain holiness to that as well. But let's just take a second to face inwardly and to become open to what the divine may have to say to us this morning. Amen. Alrighty. Um, you may notice that the setup today is a bit more bare bones. This is Emily and I's official last day in this house. We are moving to a house that we purchased recently today, which is very exciting, but also incredibly busy. It's good. It's fun. We'll make it work. But as I was saying, today we're going to explore the second of our three words, which is wonder. And we look at this through the lens of wonder being a verb. It can be a noun, it can be a verb. Grammar is fun. I'm not good at it. Just ask, I won't name names. But we're going to look at wonder within the context of it being a verb. And wonder, as defined as a verb, is a desire to be curious or to know something. A desire to be curious or to know something. It's to be intrigued. It's to lean in. It's to ask questions. It's to expand and discover something that we may not have discovered before. Desire or curiosity to know something. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about wonder. Diane Ackerman, who is a wonderful author, similar in the vein of Mary Oliver, if you like Mary Oliver. She's written numerous books. One of my favorites is A Natural History of the Senses, where she explores each of our five senses. But she has a quote about wonder where she says, "Wonder is the heaviest element on the periodic table. Even a tiny fleck of it stops time." And again, these concepts, they can seem, grandiose and dreamy and fun. But just as we can wonder about worlds beyond the wardrobe, I like that one, we can also wonder about why are the systems that govern our society the way they are? Why do some people get outraged at things and some people turn away and act like they're not happening? We can be curious about all things in our midst. Curiosity is not limited to the dream realm or the fantastical realm. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to take some of these concepts that are seen as like almost mystical or like out there and fun and based on fantasy lands, and bring them into the context of our day-to-day lives and the day-to-day things we encounter. Because wonder is not limited to the region of fantasy. And I think that's obvious, but I think it's important to label and acknowledge that. I want to begin with a visualization exercise, and this is loosely based on something that I read from Richard Rohr. If you can find the space, close your eyes, and I'm going to describe an image. And if you can't, that's okay too. You can just listen. But you may remember from when you were a student in elementary school, or maybe they even had these at your high school. My high school had whiteboards, but you may remember chalkboards. And one thing about chalkboards is that when they're written on all day, they can contain words and lessons from a variety of different subject matters. And then they can be erased, and then the chalkboard gets completely skewed and messy, and it's almost just irritating anytime somebody writes anything else on the chalkboard because it's such a mess and it's so cloudy. You and I, if we can visualize that, we're all chalkboards. We're all messy chalkboards that haven't had the sponge to clean them yet. And it makes it difficult, at least for me, to walk into a situation readily willing to wonder and be curious to learn and discover something new, because my chalkboard is such a mess from all the preconceived things that I have had put onto myself or have put onto my psyche. What wonder looks like at its best is a chalkboard that has had the sponge go over it and clean it and is now ready to receive something. Jesus, time and time again in the Gospels, he points to children as a source of wonder, as be like these children. There's something so special about how children go into every interaction with a curiosity. Sure, sometimes they can be stubborn and maybe, moody, but all of us can. But there's a certain way about kids, it seems like, where they are ready and willing to enter into a space with discovery. There's an openness. And so when Jesus says, become like a child, it's almost like become open. Like, let the guard down a little bit. Have the chalkboard be less clouded with all the preconceived notions that you've had, and become open to something new. I miss Sunday mornings so much, especially before worship starts and everybody's just kind of hanging out and all the kids are running around playing, and then afterwards too, and they'll run up to you and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Like I remember Hannah, she's so funny and always sharing different things that have happened throughout her week, and Benji's always exploring something new. And there's something about kids where they're just open to what might happen. Richard Rohr talks about what it means to not presume, to become open, and to kind of hold this space of a child. And I think this also speaks to what it means to lean into and become open to a sense of wonder. He says, we must never presume that we see. We must always be ready to see anew. But it's so hard to go back and be able to say, I don't know anything. Spirituality is about seeing without presumption. It's about intimate relationship with things rather than achieving results or meeting requirements. God's life of love is being lived within you, and you must simply learn how to say yes to that life. If you exist on a level where you can see how everything belongs, you can trust the flow and trust the life. I want to read the first part of that again. We must never presume that we see. We must always be ready to see anew. But it's so hard to go back and be able to say, I don't know anything. Spirituality is about seeing without presumption. Spirituality is about seeing without presumption, which I don't know about you, but that's incredibly hard for me because all my life has presuppositions or pre-assumed notions attached to it. But to become childlike is to become open, to discover something. And wonder, this word of wonder, what it is it's this leaning into an openness to curiosity, to discovering something new, to the assumption being put on the back burner for a second, in hopes and in faith that there might be something new that can be revealed in this moment to us. And another wonderful reality that's tied to the messages and the themes of Jesus' life is this idea of parable. Because what parable does is exactly that. It invites us into a space of wonder. It invites us into a space of curiosity to know something. A parable is not a prescription. It is a description of a situation. And it's something that is causing us to be curious because it's a tale. It's not a recipe. And in us all entering into a tale, it's like we're all sitting around a campfire trying to describe something. In the theology of Jesus, which would be the message and the theme of Jesus' life, one of them would be this idea of telling parables to tell what it is you're trying to get across. And a parable is a gateway towards wonder. And I want to read one of these parables to all of us right now because I think we'll see exactly how it does just that. I forgot my Bible over there. I'll be right back. Had to do a couple workouts this week to lift this thing. So leathery and large. So imposing, but that's fine. This is in Luke 14. So Jesus is at a Pharisee's house, and he's eating dinner. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And they had nothing to say. So Jesus is asking explicit questions. Not much conversation is happening. That sounds pretty familiar. And so then he decides to go into allegory or parable. He says, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. So He's witnessing the world around him, and he creates a metaphor about what he witnessed for all of them to have a conversation about. He says, when after he witnesses this, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, can you imagine for a second too, just out of the blue? It's quiet, everyone's kind of uncomfortable. There's this guy who walks around and like gives sermons and stuff, and he's in a house of Pharisees. They're all just having dinner together. Then all of a sudden, you know that guy just comes up and splurts out a metaphor in the midst of the silence by saying, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both you will come to you and say, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. I'm not really all that interested right now in deconstructing and analyzing the meaning of this specific parable, although I think it's important, and although I think in the moment it probably left a lot of people really uncomfortable about which seat they had chosen, which is fun to think about. What I'm more curious about here is the way that Jesus goes about starting conversation, as he tells a story and he observes the world around him and what he witnesses, and he is giving a description of something rather than a prescription of something to hopefully engage people in conversation. Look at how Jesus witnessed the situation, and internally he's trying to piece the puzzle together. And then he shares an idea. And this particular parable is ridding of assumption. So, you may think that you belong in this chair, you don't, you may belong in this chair. Like I said, I'm not that interested actually in discerning what this parable is explicitly trying to say. I just think what's really interesting about this is how Jesus goes about starting conversation. And I think what we find in the theme and the message of Jesus' life is something that is directly tied to the theme of wonder that we're exploring and that we find as a core concept of who we are to be as branches. I mean that more as just a community, but we're all just little branches or big branches. But it's all about being curious, asking questions, because wonder is the opposite of assumption. Perhaps it requires us to step out of the expected sphere. I know that there are so many people in my life who I am close to that I can bring up one thing that I am infuriated about when it comes to our government and the place and time that we exist within, and all the injustices that are going on in our society. And I could talk to people about that, and they can get mad, and I can get mad, and we're talking in explicit language, and we need those spaces because we need to shed light on the things that are just not working. I'm not saying that that's not important. It is important. But what I worry about sometimes is that we've all created these inverted pyramids of our lives, and all of us exist right here. But there's a whole other world right here. But all of our conversation, at least for me, I don't want to prescribe to what your life is like, but I find that I spend so much time here, and in spending time here, all it is an echo chamber of confirmation bias. I'm pissed about this, I'm pissed about this, we're all pissed about this. But parable, wonder, curiosity are conversations that exist here. They're conversations that are zoomed out, they're based on story. They're based on the world and what we're witnessing around us. And they're based on the curiosity that is born from our wonder, the questions that are born from our observation. And I think that's incredibly important for us to be able to find ways to enter into and engage in those conversations. Because otherwise, the conversations and the reality we're existing in are echo chambers of frustration. And that is not sustainable. It's not life-giving. It's going to collapse our anxiety even further inward. When everyone thinks alike, it's not all that fun. We have a need as human beings to be curious beyond the scope we already have for the world. If not, we're just these little bugs that are going around saying, "Mah, mah, 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 mah," and then we hear other bugs that say, "Mah, mah, mah, mah," and then either those bugs agree with our "mah, mah, 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 mahs," or they don't, and if they don't, then we just cast frustration and anger at them, which again, time and a place for that, for sure. Not saying there's not, but, or we just only hear the same thing over and over again. And I think that is happening more and more, is we're finding spaces that we can find commonality because it makes sense that we would want that, But I think a large part of the reason why we're doing that is we've forgotten how to tell stories. We've forgotten how to be curious and to tap into wonder and to ask questions, because it's those things that allow for conversation up here. At least I think. I mean, it's not always that easy. I totally understand that. And I also have here, I wanted to add, there's a caveat. I mean, some people are just bigots. Some people refuse to have a conversation, no matter how hard you try to be open and to be curious. And it's not healthy to be spending your time with people who are going to demean who you are as a human being. Absolutely. I personally, and maybe I'm still young and naive, but I cling to the hope that there are still more intersections than places of divergence between humans, no matter what the ideology. I mean, it depends how far we have to zoom out. At this point in time, all of us still live on Earth. We could start there. I live on Earth. So do I. What do you think about the place? But wonder asks questions, and it seeks commonality, and it does so by intentionally zooming out and finding a story that we can all identify with. And that's really hard for us right now, because the stories we tell have become more and more insular, because that is the safe space for us to find ourselves in. But what if we were to start broad and to zoom out? You're human, I'm human. Let's start there. What are the stories that we can tell? What are the questions that our wonder can birth that can lead to a space of conversation? And that is what we're focusing on with the second word. Are those questions? Is that curiosity? Um, this is so cheesy and classic preachery, but this morning I was thinking, I told Emily, and she's like, that kind of sounds a little dirty. But I said, when we wonder, we WAT. And WAT is an acronym. So don't, yeah, it's great. What WAT stands for, W-A-T, is when we wonder, we witness the world. We ask curious questions about what we see, and we talk to one another about those questions and that curiosity. We witness, we ask, and we talk. That's what wonder is trying to get out of us. It's trying to allow and invite us towards witnessing, invite us towards asking curious questions, questions based on curiosity, of a willingness to expand. And then it's about talking about those things, not agreeing on those things, but what can our curiosity provide for us that can lead to a conversation? And can we enter into a conversation not necessarily agreeing, but learning how to hold and have that space? And I sense, you're not even here, I sense rising within so many of us is like, well, Mike, it's not that easy. Some people are just so close-minded. I've tried, okay? I've tried with Aunt Lou. Aunt Lou will just not go there with me. I get it. I got Aunt Lou's, not literally, but I know of people like that, and this is not going to work for everybody. But I think the more and more we can start building a ladder to climb out of the bottom of that inverted pyramid, the more we're going to begin to see the story of other people again. And stories need not be things that are 100% the same as our stories to be things that matter. At least I certainly hope not. And I think wonder can be the key to helping allow for us to witness those stories as well. And story is the thing that leads us to wonder by attaching and looking for that story. So many of us can't even witness the world because we are so frustrated by what we see. And I'm right there with you. But if we start to see the story, if we start to see different pockets of stories everywhere, and we start to ask questions by wondering about why those stories are the way they are, a question is the key to unlock and open a door. As long as what is attached to the question is not an expected result. And that's really difficult, but more than ever right now, I think it's what we need. I think that's what parable did for Jesus. And I think that is what Jesus is trying to show us, is enter in with the parable, enter in with the question. And in doing so, make the dinner party uncomfortable, but curious. There's not enough curiosity right now. I think there's just a lot of assumption. And that's scary. And it aches my heart, because if we can't be curious, then we can't see beyond the scope we've constructed for ourselves. You can ask the question, what am I learning and seeing and encountering today that challenges my assumptions of yesterday. That is wonder's practice. It's asking that question. What am I learning and seeing and encountering today that challenges my assumptions of yesterday? And if we can wipe that chalkboard clean, but also know, like, what is our chalkboard made out of, that we're not going to just let this crap be written on our chalkboard, but wipe it clean so that we can enter into a space with curious space. To conclude, I want to give a note on my grandfather, which I've talked about him a good amount. He passed away, as some of you know, towards the end of this summer. And we went back to Michigan to celebrate a family-only memorial with him. And he was, I may have said this before, but out of all the people who I've lost in my life, I feel like he's the one who I hold on to most. He indwells within me more than any other. And it was tough, and it still is tough to think of this person's physical form no longer being here. It's a very strange thing, especially when you're 2,000 miles away from where that form primarily functioned and operated. But I was trying to find words as we were headed back to Michigan to kind of celebrate his life and piece together exactly what he taught me and what he meant to me. And there's so much. Somebody like him who constantly was an encouragement, constantly had the right words to lift your spirits up, constantly wanted you to be in their presence, was somebody who, like, finding words to capture their memory is not easy. But what struck me was the reality that with him, he was somebody who recognized that there is enough wonder in our midst to last our curiosity a lifetime. He was always asking questions. Why did the rabbits come back for his Cheerios time and time again? And a lot of times his questions, they were the fun ones of, like, the questions about the rabbits, the questions about the birds and the snakes and the trees. But there's something about a person who can operate from a place of question asking and to consistently go back there. And even when he got the answer, it wasn't looking for it. I mean, I remember one time he had some question, I can't remember what it was, and I pulled out my iPhone as the youngin' that I am, and I typed in the question that he had, and I gave him the answer, and he brushed it off. He kind of just ignored it. He didn't care. For him, it was about wondering, and it was about question asking, and it was about the conversation that came from asking those questions, about the rabbit trails that we could go on. And I think that the intersection of Richard Christie's life and the life of Jesus and the life of all of us, I think, when we're living into our best selves, is we can present a question. We can present a curiosity. We can lean into wonder. And in doing so, it's not necessarily about arriving at the same place, but it's about the conversation that can happen around that dinner table because of it. A lot of us, I feel like right now, it's so hard to have conversation. It's so hard to be curious. And if we can't satisfy that part of our human nature, the part that wants to wonder about the place and time that we occupy, that wants to bridge gaps through storytelling and through question asking, we're going to collapse inward. We're going to separate, and it's painful. We need these bridges, and again, it's not always easy. But how can we learn to try? Because curiosity may have killed the cat, but it may just save this country right now. We need to be more curious. We need to lean in to wonder. We need to witness the stories around us, the stories that aren't always the stories we agree with, and we need to ask questions and to be curious about those stories and try as best as we can to engage in conversation, not based on indoctrination or giving one's opinion, but based on discovery, based on climbing a little bit further out of that inverted pyramid. we also need to take care of ourselves in the midst of doing that. And hopefully, what branches can be is the place that you can feel like you can come back to and feel safe as you venture out and be the branch that is doing these things in your midst. And it's not easy, and it's difficult, and I am preaching to myself just as much as anyone. But I think if we can do that, we can begin to learn to see one another again. We can lean into the idea of humanity being greater than ideology. And Lord knows we need it right now. Like I said, I'm so hopeful that there are more intersections still that each one of us can have with one another. And I think wonder, question asking, curiosity, witnessing the world, asking curious questions, and talking to one another. I think all of those are the things that we need in order to start climbing. I hope, anyways. So I hope this is encouraging. I hope it's challenging. I hope it's both of those things. I hope it's causing you to wonder as well. It's not easy. Got a long road ahead of us, but I'm hoping that this can be a start. So to close, maybe a benediction, a prayer, a thought, a poem, a free verse poem, whatever word floats your boat and doesn't cause you to feel too irksome in your chair or your couch or wherever you may be. Divine flow, God, love, universe, Christ. Help us to be question askers, and help us to know that the questions are not always going to be well received. And as difficult as that may be, don't let it deflate the balloon of our curiosity. Let us continue to dedicate ourselves towards expansion, even when that's difficult. Help us to be parable tellers, to be question askers, to be ones that encourage conversation rather than indoctrination, as difficult as that is. Help us to WAT in our day-to-day lives, to witness the world, to ask curious questions about what we see, and to talk to one another about those questions and that curiosity. And be with us in that scope and space, and let us have the security and the comfort of knowing that these people in this space can be people that we can turn back into when we need to be refilled, when that's become too difficult. Be with us these next few months and going forward, because the anxiety is real and we need the comfort of what you can bring. Love you and thank you. And amen. We're going to hop on Zoom here shortly. I'll post a link in the comments if you want to join us for that. And then next week, we're talking about the last of our 3 words, which is action, which I'm excited about. And then, like I said, we'll all be joining a town hall style meeting to formalize some of these things. And you can be on the lookout for an email we'll send out later this week regarding the specifics tied to that. Thanks so much. I know this isn't easy. I know it's a difficult conversation. I know that at times it's really easy to roll your eyes at these concepts because you may have heard them and you may have tried them, but I hope that they can be encouraging and maybe spark something for you. Go in grace and peace, and I hope to see some of you on Zoom. Thanks.